It's strange how life circles back. You spend years convincing yourself that certain chapters are closed, that some people belong only to memory, and then one ordinary night, the universe brings them back, just to test how much you've really healed. That's how it started for me. A Friday night, rain tapping softly against my apartment window, the city glowing in gold and gray. I had just poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop, ready to lose myself in meaningless work. And then, that message appeared. Still awake? The number was familiar. Too familiar. My chest tightened before my brain even processed it. It couldn't be him. Not after all these years. Not after the silence that had swallowed us whole. I stared at the screen for a long minute, my fingers frozen above the keyboard. And then, without really deciding, I replied, "I am. Who's this?" Even though I already knew. A pause. 3 dots blinking. And then his name appeared. Ethan. I felt something collapse quietly inside me. He didn't say much at first. Just the kind of small talk 2 strangers might exchange. Except we weren't strangers. We never really had been. He asked if I still lived in New York. I said yes. He said he was here for a few weeks on business. And then, almost casually, "Would you like to catch up? Just coffee. Nothing serious." I should have said no. Every rational part of me screamed it. But curiosity, or maybe nostalgia, has a strange way of overpowering logic. So I agreed. We met the next evening at a little cafe tucked between 7th and West Broadway, the kind of place where conversations felt safe, hidden under the hum of low jazz and warm light. When I walked in, he was already there. Same deep eyes, same half smile, but older, sharper somehow, like time had carved something heavy into him. "Hi, Maya," he said, standing up as I approached. His voice still had that quiet gravity that could make a crowded room fade away. "Hi," I replied, barely above a whisper. We talked for hours, about work, cities, old friends, everything except us. It was easier to pretend we were just 2 adults reconnecting after a long time, and not the same people who once promised forever and shattered it in one night. But beneath every casual word, there was tension, invisible but electric. A kind of silence that said more than words ever could. When the cafe closed, he walked me home. The rain had stopped, but the streets glistened under the streetlights, reflections stretching like liquid memories. At my building's entrance, we both hesitated. "I'm glad we did this," he said. "Me too," I lied. Because the truth was, it hurt. Seeing him again, hearing his voice, remembering everything we'd buried, it all hurt in ways I'd promised myself I'd never feel again. He looked at me for a long second. His hand twitched slightly, like he wanted to touch me but wasn't sure he had the right anymore. "Good night, Maya," he said finally. And just like that, he was gone. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, not as he was now, calm, distant, polite, but as he had been years ago, when love was new and wild and terrifying. I remembered the way he used to make coffee exactly the way I liked it, 2 sugars, no milk. The way he'd sketch little doodles on napkins when he was nervous. The way he'd whisper, "You're my peace," on nights when the world felt too heavy. And I remembered the fight, the words that cut too deep, the ring I left on the counter the morning I walked away. The next day, he texted again. "Did you sleep?" "Barely," I replied. Same. And somehow that one word felt like an apology neither of us had the courage to say. Over the next few days, we kept texting. Not constantly, but enough. Enough to make the silence between us shrink. He told me he was staying at a hotel near the river, that he'd been offered a promotion overseas, that he wasn't sure if he should take it. And then one evening, "I'd like to see you again, just dinner this time." I should have said no again, but my heart had already made the mistake once. What was one more? We met at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the skyline. The city pulsed below us, alive and endless. He looked beautiful in the city lights, confident, composed, but with that same softness in his eyes that used to undo me completely. Dinner was easy. Laughter came easier. For a while, it almost felt like we'd time traveled, back to when everything between us was simple and full of possibility. Then, somewhere between dessert and goodbye, he said something that changed everything. "I never stopped loving you, Maya." My breath caught. It wasn't the confession that stunned me. It was the ache in his voice, the raw honesty of it. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat felt tight, words trapped somewhere between anger and longing. Finally, I whispered, "You don't get to say that now." He looked at me, really looked, and said softly, "Maybe not. But it's still true." And in that moment, every wall I'd built began to tremble. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't over him, not even close. Maybe you never really get over the person who taught you what love feels like. Maybe you just learn how to carry it quietly until the universe decides to remind you that you're still human. The hum of the jet engine was steady, low and hypnotic, like a heartbeat buried under layers of steel and sky. I sat by the window of the private plane, staring at the clouds drifting past, though I wasn't really seeing them. My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, pale, tired, and caught somewhere between grief and disbelief. Across the aisle, Dante Ricci sat with the same calm authority he carried everywhere, reading a file, a glass of amber scotch balanced perfectly in his hand. Even here, 30,000 feet above the world, he seemed entirely in control of himself, of the air around him, of me. When the flight attendant, another silent, efficient shadow, came to ask if I needed anything, I just shook my head. I didn't trust my voice yet. Everything about this flight felt surreal. Yesterday I was wiping down tables in Queens. Today I was on a private jet to Italy with a man people whispered about like a ghost story. I turned my gaze back to the window, trying to anchor myself in memories of home, the smell of espresso in my grandmother's kitchen, the vines that climbed the old stone walls of her garden, the warmth of her hands when she used to tuck my hair behind my ear. I wondered if she'd still recognize me now, if I'd changed too much since the last time she saw me smile. "Do you always think this much?" His voice broke the silence. Deep, smooth, almost amused. I blinked and looked across the aisle. Dante was watching me now, file closed, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Only when I'm not sure what's happening," I said quietly. He tilted his head slightly. "Uncertainty is uncomfortable for most people, but it teaches discipline." "Or fear," I replied before I could stop myself. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Not anger, but a kind of interest, sharp and unexpected. "Fear can be useful too," he said finally. He looked away, ending the conversation as abruptly as he'd begun it. But my heart didn't stop racing. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the clink of glass and the occasional rustle of paper. When the flight attendant dimmed the cabin lights, Dante stood and moved toward the rear of the plane. "Try to rest, Sophia," he said, pausing near my seat. "Tomorrow will be emotional." He left before I could answer. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the memories came. My grandmother's voice on the phone, the trembling in it, the nurse's quiet words, the way Dante had said, "Your grandmother doesn't have much time." At some point, exhaustion won. I drifted into uneasy dreams, flashes of Florence, my childhood home, the smell of rosemary and rain. And somewhere in that dream, Dante Ricci stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his presence heavy as a shadow that refused to leave. When I woke, dawn had already begun to bleed into the horizon. The plane was descending, sunlight painting the clouds gold. I pressed my forehead to the glass. Below, Italy stretched like a memory I'd almost forgotten. Green hills, terracotta roofs, winding rivers glinting like silver threads. Dante was already awake, dressed impeccably, speaking quietly into his phone in rapid Italian, the kind of Italian that came from power, not poetry. When he noticed me watching, he ended the call and said simply, "We land in 15 minutes." My heart pounded. 15 minutes until I saw her. 15 minutes until I was home. When the plane touched down, I almost forgot he existed. My hands shook as I gathered my things, but as I stepped onto the tarmac, Dante's voice stopped me. "My driver will take you to the hospice," he said, handing me a small envelope. "Everything you'll need is inside. I'll see you tonight." Inside was a phone, new, sleek, unfamiliar, and an Italian SIM card already inserted. No cash, no instructions beyond that. His eyes met mine, steady and unreadable. "Stay reachable, Sophia." I nodded, unsure if it was a request or a warning. Then I turned toward the waiting car. Florence's air hit me like a memory, warm, fragrant, and laced with something heartbreakingly familiar. As the city blurred past the window, I realized something strange. The driver never asked for an address. He already knew exactly where to take me. The car glided silently through Florence's early morning streets, past pastel-colored buildings and narrow cobblestone lanes that gleamed faintly under the weak sunlight. The city looked exactly as I remembered it, and yet nothing felt the same. Maybe because I wasn't the same. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the familiar blur of terracotta roofs and marble statues drift by. Somewhere deep inside, the little girl who used to chase pigeons in Piazza della Repubblica wanted to cry. But the woman I'd become, the one sitting in the back of a black luxury car sent by a man like Dante Ricci, knew that crying solved nothing. The driver didn't speak. He didn't need directions. Somehow, he already knew where to go. The car took turn after turn through winding streets until we reached the outskirts of the city, where the noise faded and the olive trees began to appear like old sentinels guarding the land. When we stopped, I looked up and felt my breath hitch. The hospice stood at the edge of a hill overlooking the Arno River. It was small, built of sun-faded stone, and surrounded by lavender bushes that swayed gently in the wind. The scent hit me the moment I stepped out of the car. Soft, clean, heartbreakingly familiar. My grandmother had always smelled like lavender. I walked toward the entrance, my suitcase forgotten in the trunk. The world seemed too quiet, the air too still. Inside, a nurse at the reception looked up and smiled gently. "Sophia Russo?" I nodded, unable to speak. "She's waiting for you, Cara. Room 7 at the end of the hall." The hallway stretched long and pale, the floors echoing with my footsteps. My throat burned. I'd imagined this moment 100 times during sleepless nights. How I would smile. How she would hold my hand and call me her Bambina Bella again. But now that I was here, my chest felt tight, my heartbeat too loud. When I reached the door, I stopped. My hand trembled on the handle. For a moment, I just stood there, afraid to open it, because opening it would mean facing reality. Then I took a breath and stepped inside. The room was bright, filled with the soft golden light of morning, and there she was, my grandmother, smaller than I remembered. Her silver hair spread like a halo on the pillow, her skin paper thin, but her eyes, when they opened and found me, were the same. Deep, warm, and full of love. "Sophia, amore mio." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it hit me like thunder. I rushed to her side, dropping to my knees beside the bed. Tears finally broke free, spilling down my cheeks as I took her hand. It was cool, but still strong enough to squeeze mine weakly. "Nonna, sono qui," I whispered. "I'm here." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. I knew you'd come. I prayed every night that you would. I pressed my forehead against her hand. I wanted to come sooner. I tried. She shook her head gently. You came when you were meant to. For a long time we said nothing. Just silence, breathing, the rhythmic hum of the heart monitor that filled the space like the sound of time itself. Finally, she spoke again, her gaze wandering toward the window where the sunlight danced on the curtains. Do you remember the garden? I smiled through my tears. The one with the fig tree you used to climb even though I begged you not to? She chuckled softly, the sound so fragile it made my chest ache. You were such a serious little girl, always worried about me falling. Even then you carried too much pain. Her eyes turned back to mine, the words sliced through glistening. She'd always seen through my walls, even now, when I tried to hide behind composure. I'm trying, Nona, I whispered. I left Boston. I started over. But sometimes it feels like I'm just running from ghosts. Her frail fingers brushed my cheek. Ghosts only chase us when we refuse to forgive ourselves. I bit my lip, fighting another wave of tears. I made so many mistakes. She smiled, small, knowing. Then make them mean something. Her breathing grew shallower, her voice a whisper of air. Promise me something, bambina mia. Anything. Don't live afraid. Don't hide your fire for people who fear the light. My chest broke open. I promise. She smiled again, eyes fluttering closed for a moment, as if the promise itself gave her peace. We spent hours like that, holding hands, sharing stories in half-whispers. She told me about the village gossip, about the time she caught me stealing chocolate from the pantry as a child, about my mother's laughter and the day she'd met my father. And when the sun began to sink low, painting the walls in hues of amber and rose, her breathing grew slower. I held her hand tighter. Stay with me, I whispered, the words trembling. Please, stay. But she just smiled faintly, eyes opening one last time to look at me. I'll always be here, piccola mia, in every lavender breeze. And then she was gone. The monitor flatlined, a long, steady sound that sliced through my soul. I don't remember crying. I don't remember the nurses entering or the soft murmur of condolences. All I remember is the lavender scent, strong, enveloping, and the feeling that the room had suddenly grown colder, emptier, quieter. When I finally stepped outside, dusk had fallen. The hills glowed with the fading light of day, and Florence shimmered below, a painting of gold and shadow. The car was still waiting. The same driver stood beside it, expression unreadable, as if death was just another appointment he'd been assigned to witness. Mr. Ricci asked me to take you to the villa, he said. The villa? My voice sounded foreign, detached. He nodded once. He's expecting you for dinner. For a moment I wanted to refuse, to run, to disappear into the streets of Florence, and never look back. But I had nowhere to go, no one left to call, and the strange inevitability of Dante Ricci's orbit pulled at me like gravity. The drive to the villa took nearly an hour. Darkness had settled fully by the time we reached the wrought iron gates. They opened automatically, the car gliding up a long, tree-lined path toward a sprawling mansion that looked less like a home and more like something carved out of history. Stone walls, arched windows, balconies dripping with ivy. It was beautiful, hauntingly so. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, chandeliers, paintings that probably cost more than my apartment lease. I stood in the entryway, lost, still in the same clothes I'd worn to the hospice, and then I saw him. Dante. He descended the grand staircase with the calm grace of someone who never had to rush for anything. His white shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, dark vest fitted perfectly across his chest. The same cold authority, but softer now, tinged with something almost human. I'm sorry about your grandmother, he said quietly. She was remarkable. I looked up sharply. You knew her? A pause. Not personally, but I know what she meant to you. Something in his voice made my stomach twist, like he'd read my grief, dissected it, understood it more than he should. I appreciate what you did, I said, my voice small, for letting me come here, for the flight, the chance to say goodbye. His gaze held mine, steady, unreadable. You don't owe me gratitude, Sophia. Then what do I owe you? That faint, dangerous half-smile ghosted across his lips. We'll discuss that soon. He gestured toward the dining room. You should eat. You look exhausted. I followed him because I didn't know what else to do. The dining room was vast, but the table had been set for two. Candlelight flickered across crystal glasses and silver cutlery. As we ate in silence, the tension in the air thickened. Not hostile, but electric. At one point, I caught him studying me, not with lust, not with pity, with calculation, like he was deciding what kind of person I was, how far I could bend before breaking. Finally, he spoke. You told your grandmother you were running from ghosts. My fork froze midair. You were listening? I listened to everything, he said simply, especially the things people try to hide. The honesty in his tone chilled me more than deceit ever could. He leaned back slightly, eyes glinting in the candlelight. You and I are not so different, Sophia. Both of us lost something we loved. Both of us learned to survive in a world that feeds on weakness. And what are we surviving for, Mr. Ritchie? I asked softly. His gaze locked with mine. To make sure we're never powerless again. For a moment the world went still. The candle flames flickered. The night outside pressed close against the glass. Something unspoken hung between us. Something that felt dangerously like understanding. Then he stood, his chair scraping softly against the floor. Get some rest, he said, voice low. Tomorrow the work begins. And before I could ask what he meant, he was gone. I sat there long after the candles burned low, staring at the doorway where he'd stood. My grandmother was gone. My old life was gone. And whatever tomorrow held, whatever work Dante Ritchie had planned for me, I could already feel it pulling me deeper into his world. A world where grief and power, love and danger blurred until you couldn't tell them apart. I remember the first morning I woke up and felt the weight of his silence. The sun was spilling through the curtains, warm and golden, painting soft lines on the sheets, but something about that day felt off. Ethan wasn't beside me. His side of the bed was cold, untouched, and his phone buzzed quietly on the nightstand. A reminder that he was somewhere else, thinking about something I wasn't part of. For a moment I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, pretending it didn't bother me. Pretending that love was supposed to feel like this. Uncertain, quiet, half empty. But deep inside, a small voice whispered the truth. Love was never meant to hurt this way. I got up, wrapped the silk robe around me, and walked toward the balcony. The city looked beautiful that morning, the streets already alive, the smell of coffee and rain mixing in the air. But beauty doesn't comfort you when your heart starts to drift away from the person it beats for. I made 2 cups of coffee anyway, out of habit, one for me, one for him. Then I waited. The minutes felt like hours. When Ethan finally walked in, he looked exhausted, hair messy, eyes distant. Morning, I said softly. Hey, he replied, barely meeting my gaze. That was it. No kiss, no warmth, just a single word that felt colder than winter. I tried to start small talk, something ordinary. I thought maybe we could go to the gallery today. They're showing that artist you love. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't real. I've got work. Maybe another time. Maybe another time. The phrase that kills love slowly. As he left, I stood there in silence, holding 2 cups of coffee. One untouched. The steam rising from it faded, and I realized something. Maybe this was what love turned into when one person started falling out of it. quiet, gentle, invisible. That afternoon, I found myself in our favorite bookstore. I wandered between aisles, pretending to read titles, but really I was hiding from my thoughts, from my fear that maybe the man who once looked at me like I was his whole world now saw me as part of the background. A stranger beside me dropped a book, and as I bent to help, I smiled politely. She smiled back and said, "You look like someone waiting for a story to start again." Her words stayed with me. Waiting for a story to start again? Maybe that's exactly what I was doing. Waiting for Ethan to look at me like he used to, waiting for my heart to stop feeling so alone inside the same home we built together. That night, I decided to talk to him. Really talk. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I sat beside him and whispered, "Ethan, are we okay?" He paused, his thumb hovering over the screen. "Why would you ask that?" "Because lately it feels like we're just here. Not together, not apart. Just existing." He sighed, long and tired. "Maya, I've just been stressed. Work's been crazy, you know that." I nodded. I did know that. But I also knew that excuses were easier to say than truth. "I understand," I said softly, "but I just miss us." He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. And for the first time in our relationship, silence became louder than words. Days turned into weeks. We still lived together, but it was like sharing space with a ghost. He'd come home late, sometimes not at all. I stopped asking why, not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid of the answer. And yet, I couldn't stop loving him. That's the hardest part, when your heart refuses to stop even when your mind knows it should. One evening, I found a photo of us from last summer, laughing by the beach, sand on our skin, sunlight in our eyes. I stared at it for a long time before tucking it into my journal. Love like that doesn't just vanish. It hides. It waits. I started writing again, not stories this time, but pieces of my heart. Words I could never say to him. "I miss the way you used to hold me, like I was the only thing keeping you alive. I wish I knew when we stopped being a team. I wish you'd look at me again and remember." One night, while he was asleep, I sat on the floor beside the bed and just watched him. The moonlight fell across his face, soft and pale. He looked peaceful. I whispered, "Do you still dream of me, Ethan?" He didn't stir, and in that moment, I realized something both beautiful and devastating. Love doesn't always end with a fight. Sometimes it ends quietly, with one person still holding on and the other already gone. The next morning, I left him a note on the table. Not a goodbye, just a few words that had been living inside me for too long. "I love you, but I need to find myself again." I went to the train station, my heart pounding. As the train pulled away, the city blurred into streaks of gold and blue. I didn't cry. I just sat there, holding on to that single thought. Maybe love wasn't about forever. Maybe it was about finding who you were when it was gone. As the train curved past the ocean, I felt something strange. Not relief, not sadness, but peace. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from someone you still love. The train moved along the coast, cutting through silver fog and morning light. The sound of wheels against the tracks was hypnotic, like the rhythm of a new heartbeat. For the first time in months, I wasn't running away from love. I was running toward myself. I stepped out at a small seaside town I'd never been to before. Quiet streets, pastel-colored houses, and a faint smell of salt and coffee in the air. Everything felt different here, as if the world had slowed down just enough for me to breathe again. I found a tiny apartment overlooking the sea. Nothing fancy, just a bed, a balcony, and the ocean humming in the distance. It was perfect. Every evening I'd sit by the railing, writing in my journal, listening to the waves crash like soft applause, reminding me I was still alive, still capable of feeling. It's strange how life heals you in small, unexpected ways. One day, while sketching by the beach, I met a local artist named Noah. He was quiet, with kind eyes and a laugh that felt like sunlight. He didn't try to fill the silence, he respected it. Maybe that's what made me trust him. We started meeting often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks that turned into conversations about nothing and everything. I told him bits of my past, never all of it, but enough for him to understand that my heart had scars. He never judged, he just listened. One evening, as we watched the sunset bleed into the horizon, he said something that stayed with me. You don't have to rush love. When it's real, it won't feel like falling. It'll feel like coming home. I smiled, though my eyes stung with tears. Maybe love doesn't die. Maybe it just changes shape until it finds the right place to rest. Weeks passed. The air grew warmer, and so did I. The pain of leaving Ethan didn't vanish overnight. It softened, like sea glass rubbed smooth by time. Sometimes I still thought about him, about what we had, but not with regret, just gratitude. Because even the love that breaks you teaches you something about who you are. One night while sitting by the shore, I found myself whispering to the waves, "Thank you for loving me once." The wind answered in silence, gentle, forgiving, eternal. Later that week, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unmistakable. Ethan. My hands trembled as I opened it. Maya, I saw the note you left. I've read it every day since. You were right. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you, stopped feeling what mattered. I thought love was something we could keep without trying. I was wrong. If you ever come back, I'll be here. Not to hold you back, just to say thank you for teaching me what love really means. Ethan. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it inside my journal. I didn't cry. I didn't call. Some stories don't need new chapters. They just need closure. That night, I walked to the beach again. The stars hung low over the water, like tiny promises. Noah joined me, carrying 2 cups of cocoa. He handed me one and smiled. "For the thoughts you haven't written yet," he said. We stood there in silence, 2 souls watching the ocean breathe. I turned to him and whispered, "You know what's funny? For the first time, I'm not afraid of tomorrow." He smiled. "That's how you know you're healing." And I realized, love isn't about who stays or who leaves. It's about who you become after both. I still write sometimes, not about heartbreak, but about hope, about quiet beginnings and soft, ordinary love that doesn't demand or destroy, the kind that feels like morning light through open curtains. And maybe that's the story I wanted to tell you today, because if you're listening to this, maybe you've been there too. Loving someone so deeply it hurts, losing yourself in the process, and then finding a way back. If this story touched even a small part of your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Well Lovely Tales, and keep watching every story we share. Each one a new heartbeat, a new beginning, a new tale of love. Because somewhere, in every story, there's a little piece of you too.